There was a football game last week. I don't know if you noticed. Sometimes a week seems like a long ago, but the Super Bowl, right? 100 million of us watched the Super Bowl. I'm guessing most of you probably tuned in. I thought it was the best Super Bowl probably I've ever seen. I mean, it was amazing. The whole thing, right? I mean, you got the halftime show. I don't even like Katy Perry. That was amazing. All right? She comes out and she's on that 30-foot tall walking tiger thing. I mean, I don't know, and in heels like that. I don't know how she stayed on it. They must have had her glued in place or something. That was amazing. I wasn't quite sure what was up with the beach balls and the sharks. That was a little weird. But then she's flying around on the spaceship thing, right? 40 feet up. I don't know how she did that. That was amazing. I thought it was great. The commercials, right? A lot of people just watch for the commercials. Some of them were kind of bummers, right? I mean, there are some of them that, yeah, weren't so good. But I love the polar bear with the sombrero. Remember that one with the avocado commercial? The polar bear's got the sombrero. You got to check that one out. I really liked that one. That was one of my favorites. I also liked the one with the centenarians. I don't know if you remember that one. That was the one with the 100-year-olds, right? And they were kind of sharing their wisdom. I wrote some down. I liked them so much. Some of my favorites. Live for now. That was advice from a 100-year-old. There are miracles all around. I like that one. Don't forget where you come from is one of my favorites. But my favorite, keep your eyes open and your mouth shut. I like that one. Commercials were great. Halftime show was great. The game itself, I thought it was great. Maybe you're not a sportsy type, maybe you're not into football, but when you've got two teams, one of whom won last year, one of whom is winning a whole bunch, and it was like a clash of the Titans, and it came down to this great last moment with this play that this guy made. It's an interception, and that play is going to be replayed for 100 years. It's going to be one of the greatest moments in Super Bowl history. What a lot of people don't know is that the guy that made that play, they had practiced that in practice the week before, and he'd screwed it up. He got it wrong. And so when it happened in the game and he saw it, he knew he had to go, and he had to go get it. But they had worked on that. These guys work on everything. I mean, the life of a professional athlete, we see, if you're a football fan, you watch a game on Sunday and you talk about how this guy did that or how that guy did that. You don't hear about the stuff that goes on behind the scenes, right? When they're up at 5:30 in the morning working out, when they spend hours and days watching film. I mean, I don't know how many times you can watch a football game and see different things, but you read about that. They spend all this time doing that. Their job, right? The Super Bowl was just last week. You want to guess what they did this week? They went to work. They went to work getting ready for next season. All these things happen behind the scenes. All the work that they do, we don't see. We don't see the work that this guy put in learning how to catch a football. Just over and over, just catching a football. Or running. Or lifting weights. All kinds of things that go on. All we see is the Sunday stuff, and that's what we focus on. But there's a lot more that goes into it. Well, with Jesus, we hear a lot about the big stuff. All right? We all come to Christmas and we hear about his birth. That's great. And we come to Easter and Good Friday, and that's great. And we come and we hear stories each week, and they're usually stories that are the big stories. Right? Because that's what we like to celebrate. We hear about, we could probably go around the room and hear some of your favorite Bible stories. It'd probably be things like the feeding of the 5,000. Right? Everybody who's been a Christian for a while knows that one. Jesus feeds 5,000 people with a few loaves of bread and some fish. We know that. That's good. We celebrate that. We celebrate the miracles of, there's 10 lepers that he heals, and we celebrate that. We celebrate the big stuff that Jesus does. But the big stuff was only a small part of his life. I mean, Jesus spent 3 years walking around in Israel, preaching, teaching, and healing people. And we've got 4 Gospels, the longest of which you could probably read in about an hour. All right, now I guess that if you looked at my life, and my life isn't even that interesting, and you tried to sum up 3 years of it, it'd probably take more than an hour. I like to think so, right? We get a very condensed version of Jesus' life, right? The stories and the ways that they were told. It's kind of hard back then to write a long book about somebody's life. He just didn't do it. So hit the highlights. That's what we get a lot. We get the highlights. We get the Super Bowl interception. What we have today in this story is the behind-the-scenes stuff. This is almost like a day in the life of Jesus. All right? This is just kind of what he does, just kind of takes us through it. And from that, we learn something very important. Because, you see, it's hard to do what Jesus did as a modern American, all right? Are you and I going to walk around and talk to somebody about crops growing in a field and how that relates to God's plan for your life? No. Because we don't see crops. They're not around. Right? Jesus preaches a great message at the Last Supper and washes the disciples' feet because they're dirty, because they all walk around in sandals and it's dusty everywhere. It's not very dusty where I live, and I don't walk around in sandals very much, and my feet don't get very dirty. We lose some of that stuff. It can be hard to live the way Jesus lived today because our life is so different. What would Jesus do with an iPhone? Don't know. How would Jesus use Facebook? Tough to say. We have to make choices every day, all day, about how to live our lives, and it can be difficult to figure out what Jesus would do because he wasn't in those situations. But what we can figure out from this little passage, this little snippet of Jesus' life, we can figure out what was important to him. He reveals in this what his values are. What does he prioritize? And we can take that and put that into our life so that we prioritize the same things. We won't be able to make the same choices because we live in a different world, but we can have the same values. And we can put the same things in the same order. So let's see what Jesus does here. First thing he does is he goes to somebody's house and he heals them. All right? That's good. And then, see, there's a lot of healings. But then they have dinner. He spends the evening with him. All right? Jesus spends a lot of time having meals with people. But it doesn't get the press because it just says then they had dinner. Or they had a meal together. Jesus spends a lot of time in community with his disciples. That's one of his values. Then that evening, at sundown, more miracles. All right, we read about those over and over. He casts out demons. He doesn't permit them to speak. Then in the morning, I talked about this in the children's sermon, while it was very dark, he got up and he went off to be alone and pray. And as I said in the children's message, this is how Jesus prays the most. He does it in the Garden of Gethsemane, but it's at night. All right? He spends a lot of time in communion with God. In this passage, he's valuing community with his disciples and their families, and he's valuing communion and time spent alone with God. That's not to say that he doesn't gather together and worship. He does that when he reads the scriptures and he prays. But specifically, communion with God is a value that he has. And then they go look for him, right? Because Jesus is missing. And they're like, what do we do? They go look for him. They run and they find him. And then they say, all right, there's all these people here, Jesus, and it's time to go do your thing. And he says, no, we're out of here. We're leaving to go to other people. Because, and the translation here, it kind of gets there. That I may proclaim the message there also. There's a better translation that I like, which says, I must go and preach to those of unbelief. In other words, Jesus already has a crowd. He's got himself a little church gathered together. He does it pretty quickly. He's Jesus after all. It doesn't take him long. It takes him a night, and then he's got a little church. And then he's got them together, And you'd think that it would be time to, just hang out and be church together and have potlucks and all that stuff. And he says, no, I got to go find new people. Because what Jesus also values is conversion. These are the things that Jesus spends his everyday moments doing. In community with his disciples, in communion with God, and in conversion, bringing people to believe in him. That's how Jesus spends his time. That's what his values are. And it seems to me that if we're going to follow him, then community, conversion, and communion should be our values too. Amen.
Amen.